Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking with Whittney Beard, an ex-lawyer and career coach at Orrick, about how to really own and direct your career, even as a young lawyer. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm here with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Whittney Beard, an ex-lawyer and career coach at Orrick, about how to really own and direct your career, even if you're just a young lawyer. So, Whittney, welcome.
Thanks. Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us. Can you give us a little bit of your background so that our listeners understand more about where you're coming from?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a former practicing attorney. I am about 18 years out of law school, which is shocking to me.
I know, it seems like yesterday, right?
Right, exactly. And I practiced law for about 7 years. I practiced as a corporate finance attorney at a large law firm in Los Angeles at the beginning of my career. I also clerked for a district court judge for a year before I did that. Mm-hmm. And then at the tail end of my career, I actually had a law school teaching fellowship at a local law school here in San Diego, and kind of dipped my toe in the water of academia and quickly decided that it was not the life for me. For various reasons, although it was really fun to work with law students. And then, so having decided that I was pretty much done with all the different parts of my legal career, I decided to get trained as a life coach, which is a pretty big 180.
Yeah, for sure.
But it really seemed to fit my personality. I was always kind of the person at the firm or in the office who was talking with other people about their lives and their careers and what they really wanted. And so it felt like a really natural fit for me. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing that for about 11 years now. For the past 8 years, almost 8 years, I've been exclusively working at Orrick with their lawyers as the career coach in-house.
So what does that mean exactly? Like, what do you do for them?
So pretty much I'm a confidential career coaching resource to any U.S. lawyer who wants to work with me at the firm. And that really runs the gamut from summer associates to first-year associates, all the way up through our partners. I'd say the sweet spot of my clientele at the firm is usually mid-levels to senior associates and then junior partners. That's where we kind of start to really dig in on, business development, and it starts to get a little bit more intense at that point in your career, and we start really looking at how are you managing teams, how are you relating to other people, how are you managing, stress in your life and at work? And then also, how are you staying focused on your professional development as well as your business development goals? So that's kind of the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of what I do with our lawyers. But because I'm an in-house resource, I'm also someone at the firm who can just pretty much talk to anyone in a confidential setting about any question they have around, all of our policies, whether it's flexible working or our caregiver leave policies for associates who are deciding to have a family. And it's kind of a really neat thing that we offer, because you can go and have a conversation about all of your questions and all of your thoughts about what your career might look like without really, sharing it with anyone until you're ready and until you've had a chance to sort of game it out or bounce the ideas off of someone else and really figure out how it might end up working.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was talking to someone recently on the podcast who is a legal recruiter now, but she was saying in the process, she was at a firm, obviously, before she did that. She's like, oh yeah, I just talked to everyone at the firm about how I was thinking about leaving. And it was like, did that seem like a good idea?
Yeah.
And she was like,
well,
yeah, she was like, well, in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have been talking about, to my boss about how I wanted to leave possibly. But it sounds like you are, the person she could have gone to talk to basically and been like, I don't think this is working for me necessarily, or like, not in the way that I want it to be. what do I change or what do I do next?
Yeah. It occurs to me pretty frequently that had I had someone like me when I was practicing at a large law firm, I think things might have gone a little bit differently for me. I don't think I would have ended up a partner at a large law firm. I'm sure that was really never going to be what was my ultimate objective. But I think I probably would have stayed a little while longer, a good year or two longer at least. In the minds of a large law firm, those are critical years. They're very profitable
that's a
years.
lot of money for them.
Yeah, and I think I also, I would have suffered a little bit less. I think, there were lots of things I loved about being a lawyer at a big law firm. I did exciting work. I worked with great people. I still see that, obviously at my firm, I see the opportunities there. But there was also a lot of just angst and also not really knowing how to manage all the different balls that were in the air and how to manage the different personalities. I sort of internalized a lot and dealt with it all myself. Having someone to go and just talk with and kind of blow off some steam, or even just get some tips on how to better manage my time or better manage the personalities that I worked with, I think would have really saved me a lot of grief, and it would have made me more effective, and it like I said, it would have had me last longer at the firm.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of lawyers go into therapy so they can go and talk about their career. There's a lawyer turned therapist I know who's kind of like, well, usually we end up talking about the firm, and their career path. I think there is, these are kind of strange places to work, and I think there's a lot of pressure from a lot of different directions. What, in your experience, do you think new or kind of newish lawyers, maybe up to that sort of junior partner level, what are they doing right and wrong as they start their careers? Like, what mistakes are they making repeatedly, and what are the people who are happier doing differently?
I think that's such a great question, and I think the trend that I really see, particularly for very junior lawyers, and it changes over the course of the career.
Sure.
I think for very new lawyers, like first, second, third years kind of coming into the firm, the folks who I see who are happiest and thriving, they're very well networked. They have in the firm, they have great relationships. And that doesn't mean they have a lot of relationships necessarily, but it means that the people that they do work with, whether it's other associates, whether it's staff or partners, they definitely have a few solid relationships. So they've created connection and sort of that human touch at the firm. That's one thing. I think a mistake that I see a lot of juniors make is they, we're all very, we went to law school for a reason. We kind of have a personality type to some degree.
Sure.
And so, we tended to be successful. We've been successful in our educational lives, and we've probably been pretty, heavily at the helm of every single choice, right? Like, I'm going to take this class, and then I'm going to take this class, and then, I'm going to get this internship and that summer associate position. And I think you kind of have to take your hands off the wheel a little bit when you first get started at a law firm at the very, very early stage. I find that if you're really focused on every experience. So if you're 6 months into your law firm and you still haven't gotten a particular experience that you feel like you need to have.
I haven't taken a deposition. It's like, exactly. You're first year. Calm down.
When am I gonna? And it's like, well, it's gonna so I'm a big proponent of being, asking and being intentional about what it is that you seek. And I'm a coach, right? So I'm all about people being clear about where they want to end up and how they're going to get there. But there's some level in those first couple years of just let the experiences roll in, let it occur, and see what you like, see who you like, see where your career kind of takes you. Don't get too focused on directing it, because that will stress you out. And you really, the facts kind of are, you don't really have a lot of control at that stage. You don't really have a lot of expertise. You really are a blank slate in a lot of ways. So you're going to get a lot of very general assignments as a result. So I think that's a big thing that I see when I see people come in and they're very, very focused on particular experiences or a very specific type of work. I find that can be very stressful for them. And then the other thing, sorry.
No, I was just saying that's a very interesting point. And I think from my experience in a firm, I think a lot of the most valuable experiences I had were really, not like first chairing a deposition, but maybe somebody brought me along as the second chair to help them. I wasn't actually talking. Obviously, the first like couple that I went to, they're not just going to throw you in and be like, all right, go defend this deposition. But once you've sat through a couple of them and been the person handing over the papers, and you probably did a lot of the prep and you did a lot of the questions and things like that, then people start to feel more comfortable with you. But you can't just go in and demand, I should be defending this deposition. It's like, oh, okay, what do you know? Nothing.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. And I do think what's really cool about, there's always the endless talk about millennials and the sort of, there's lots of, negativity, I think, around what millennials expect. And I think the cliche or the caricature of the millennial is kind of what you just mentioned, like, oh, give me this opportunity, even though I've not proven that I can do it.
Like remotely competent or trained.
Yeah. And I think that I think that's a big part of it too. Is like this is this is a tough profession, and talk about cliches, like we've all heard the sort of like 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in one of his fabulous books. And it's like, 10,000 hours, not just 10,000 like billable hours on any random thing, but like 10,000 focused hours of practice makes you a master. And that's a lot of hours. And we're doing a lot of different things as junior lawyers. So like we're sort of scattershot.
Right.
And so if you just imagine like your job is to just really take in the experiences and understand that, and this kind of folds into my last point about what can kind of derail or keep a person happy as a junior is, you spend a lot of time as not an expert, and we're used to being at the top of our class, and you spend a lot
it's painful.
Of time.
It's very painful.
It's painful. And sometimes the best way to learn something is to royally screw it up. And that's often how you do learn at a law firm. And so it takes a little bit of like, you kind of have to put your ego to the side and also expect that you will screw up. Don't make silly mistakes. Do what you can. Like if you know you're prone to grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes, then, focus on that, work on that, get someone to support you to make sure you don't make those mistakes. Because you don't want to make the silly mistakes. Right. You want to make the mistake like, oh, I didn't know that filing was due, and now someone caught it, and we're going to file it, and it's at the deadline, and I really missed that bullet. But like, so much of the learning is through making mistakes.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between, I remember once getting yelled at because I misspelled someone's name in a letter, and like, that's legitimate. Like, that's a screw up. You don't do that.
Yeah.
But then
you never did it again, right?
No, I never did it again. And at the time I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I completely own this. This was a complete screw up. I totally get your point. You probably don't trust me for anything else for a while. I understand that. It won't happen again.
Right.
But then, then there are other things. Like, for example, the first time, probably the only time actually that I ended up actually taking a deposition is the partner was going to do it. And then we had this settlement conference that kind of blew up. And then the client was having a fit, and like, basically they were like, you do it. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And they're like, well, you have like a 6-hour flight to the East Coast, so I'm pretty sure someone has a book. Just read the book. And I was like, what? You can't do this. This is not how, and then, it was like a tiny, tiny little piece of, it was a, joint defense thing where you had like 6 actually very experienced attorneys doing most of the deposition. And then I come in and ask a few questions. And one of the partners reads it afterwards. He's like, you did a terrible job. I'm like, what did you expect? Come on. Like, I did the best I could. I didn't know what I was doing. No one helped me. I had no training. He was like, well, this is just not. I was like, oh my God, are you just, but that's the kind of thing where you're like, okay, you're not going to be perfect.
Yeah. And, and it's funny, that's the other thing. A lot of what I do is like I said, working with people and just working with other personalities, and like, being at a law firm can be a very intense experience at times. It can be a really great experience. It can be the best training of your life. But it can be pretty intense. And to remember that everyone's human, like even partners are still learning, and they're all just being human. And I'm not always my best. I know, it's not like a first date every day with me. It's
sometimes you're like, oh, I haven't washed my hair for like 3 days.
Exactly. So I always try to keep people, tethered to that, like, hey, we're all just human beings doing our best. Sometimes it feels really bad, and but But if you can keep that in mind, it helps. And then the last thing I'll say about being successful as a junior lawyer, and really, I'm sure a lot of this kind of carries through, but it's interesting because, again, I'm a coach, right? I'm all about people having balanced, healthy, thriving lives. I think that's really important. But there's also something to being a young lawyer and also having lots and lots of experiences, which sometimes can mean like lots and lots of work.
Right.
There's something about how that creates a learning curve that works. And this ties into the mistakes thing. Like, so much of our training early on is like sort of trial by fire. We're just learning through kind of just doing the work and making mistakes and fixing our mistakes and taking feedback along the way. And what I'll notice is it's sort of like if you're not that busy, or if you're really focused on keeping your schedule kind of very, very, operating within a certain boundary, like let's say 9 to 5.
Right. Yeah, good luck.
If you're really focused on that, sometimes what happens is you just don't get the opportunity to like move through mistakes. And the analogy I use is like mountain biking or skiing or anything where you're like in motion and you can come across like a bump in the road. If you're going too slow on a bike, or if you're going too slow on skis, and you come to something that gets you a little squirrely on the bike or the skis, and you're going too slow, you'll fall. Like you just fall right over. But if you're moving fast enough, you blow right through it. And I see the same thing particularly with junior lawyers, is if your workflow isn't coming kind of smoothly and fluidly, and you get to a point where you hit a bump in the road, it's like then it gets really magnified and it feels like really much bigger than it actually is. If there's not something that, okay, well, whatever, we're just going to move right through and move on to the next thing, you kind of perseverate on it and you think about it too much. So there's really something to being open to taking on a little more than you think you can handle, and being willing to kind of just like juggle and keep yourself in motion. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. I was thinking of an experience I had when I was an associate, where basically we got called in to kind of join a case that was going to trial. And I mean, it was going to trial in like a matter of weeks. One of those situations where, I get the call where it's like, all right, this is a situation. It's going to be totally crazy. Do you want to do it or not? And I was like, oh, sure. And they're like, no, like you need to think about this. Like, this is what you need to understand what you're getting into. Like, we're going to fly to the East Coast. We're going to live there. We're going to trial. It's going to be crazy. Like, it's going to be a great learning experience. But like, you're going to be working 20 hours a day for the next month. Like, are you in or are you out? Yeah. And I was like, all right, I'll do it. Yeah. And, it was totally crazy and people were screwing things up left and right. But yeah, it was the same thing. It was just like by an hour later, no one even remembered, because it was like, all right, we can't worry about that anymore. Like that's done. Right. Like we have to be prepared for tomorrow.
Yeah. My advice is like, take that opportunity. If you can, like, there are times in your life when you can't, and there are times in your life when, absolutely those opportunities aren't going to work for you. But when you can, take them, because those are the types of experiences that can like really catapult you to the next level of your development.
Sure. And I think it's a great opportunity to get those people to bond with you who are potentially not just mentors, but really sponsors. Those people who are going to go to bat for you when the time comes and you're up for a partner and they're like, hey, I went to trial with this person, they're amazing. Like we should definitely do whatever that we need to keep them. Like, you've got to kind of go through the trenches to have those sort of relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's talk specifically about different aspects of big law, because I've worked in several places and sometimes it's kind of easy to feel like a cog in the machine. I mean, it sounds great, like, oh, take these opportunities, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes it really feels like you're just sort of at the mercy of other people who are telling you what to do, particularly I think in the early years. I mean, do you think this has to be the case? And what can associates do to really start carving their own path if they have preferences?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny. So one thing, I don't know how to explain this, so I'll try.
Right.
But there is, so here's, as a coach, a lot of my work, one person who was training me to be a coach once said to me, all there is in coaching is your client and their relationship to the world. Like that's all there ever is to coach is your client and their relationship to whatever's in front of them, whether that's, their weight, their relationships, their work, all of it. It's just them and how they relate to what's happening around them. And I would love how simple that was because I was like, cool, that's like easy job, right? That's all I have to work on. But it actually is very complicated. And so there's something about what you said where it's like, it's easy to feel like a cog in a wheel and, it's easy to feel like you're at the mercy of this sort of system. And as a coach, what I would point to there is it's like, we all have stories. We all have sort of like, we all have ideas about how the world works. And so like, if you walk into a law firm and you trend towards, or you kind of let yourself get mired into that narrative that says you're just a cog, you're just a
you have no control, like whatever.
You have no control. Yeah, all of it. It's like, well, that's going to be pretty demoralizing, right? And I mean, and I'm not here to tell you to be Pollyanna or to pretend that something is something that it's not. But also as a coach, I would challenge you to pay attention to the narrative that you've got and actually challenge yourself to shift it. So it's like, well, what are you getting out of this? Like, what are you getting out of this experience? And are you here for it? Or, do you choose it? Or would you rather choose something else? And if you choose it, well, then choose it and then make it as effective and valuable as you can so long as you choose it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's something we talk to people a lot who are struggling in law school is like, look, you don't have to be here. You're making a choice every day to show up and be a law student. That's a choice you're making. Like nobody's holding a gun to your head and making you go to class. Like maybe your parents are putting pressure on you or whatever, but it's still your choice. Yeah. And, I don't want to be like, nutso about it, but, it's like choose your choice basically. Like if you're going to do this, do it. And I think, like my experience, at least in various firms, was you've got to understand the system. But once you understand, who has the power and who's pulling the levers and who, you understand people's motivations, you can start to work within that system and, really impact who you're working with and the kind of work you're doing. I mean, obviously you can't just show up and demand like, I'm not doing this. It's like, okay, it doesn't work like that. But, if you can find a partner who you'd prefer to work for and make yourself indispensable, that person's going to be like, oh, I need you. And then you get off all the other crap, basically.
Yeah. And, and I found, so the way that I navigated that system was, this probably says bad things about me. I don't know. But like, I was never terribly interested in the particulars of the work. Like I liked the work a lot. I really did. I loved the area that I worked in. And I was like, if I was doing a transaction of some kind or another that involved like companies and money, I was like, this is fun,
So I'm like, oh God, what a nightmare.
Right. So like that, I liked that. I liked it and I enjoyed it. But what I really cared about was people. Like I wanted to work with a particular partner. I wanted to work with particular associates. I did my best to get them to want to work with me.
Right.
And
exactly.
that's how I approach it. And if you're people oriented, if you're into the relationship aspect of it, consider that that's your job. Like find the people you like and get on their teams and say, I want to do what you're doing. I don't really care what it is. That's one way to navigate the system and start to kind of carve your career. And I think, again, like had I stayed at my firm and continued down that path, I would have been successful, even though I wasn't, I don't know, maybe my not caring so much about what I was doing would have impacted me at some point.
Well,
but like, it would have gotten me somewhere and it probably would have been fine.
Yeah, exactly. I think, particularly in the early years, like how do you possibly know what kind of work you're good at or what you even want to work on? I was a patent litigator and I'd never taken a single IP class in law school. But I was a programmer before I went to law school, which turned out to be pretty useful.
Right.
Oh, okay, you can understand code and talk to engineers. Done. We don't need you to have taken an IP class. So I think sometimes people, even starting in law school, they have this idea like, oh, I have to take all of these classes and do all this. But reality is just like you show up and they're like, well, this is the big case. When I was a summer, I had asked to do, I don't know, like international arbitration or something, which later I found out was just contracts, and I hate contracts. But I remember walking in to the assigning partner and they were like, okay, well, it looks like you wanted to do some international work. So we kind of have an international case for you. I was like, okay. They're like, what do you know about federal Indian law? And I was like, what?
I love it.
And they're like, well, it's kind of international. Our client is an Indian tribe. What do you know about this? I was like, nothing. Yeah. No one would know anything about this. It's like a 2L. Come on.
Right.
But it turned out to be really fascinating. And I actually took a class in it my 3rd year and was like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I could never have predicted that.
Yeah. No, and that's true. I mean, we had a great program on, I think on Indian law at UCLA. I remember there was a
fascinating topic.
It is. I mean, it is fascinating. I've done some adoptions and stuff, and there's a whole whole layer of the adoption law that. Anyway.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, and on the flip side, if you know what you're interested in, like if you know that you're interested in an industry or you're interested in a type of case or a type of litigation or a type of transaction, then talk to people about that and know who in the firm does it. And again, get connected to them, find a way to make them feel like I want you on my team. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I want to make sure that I do.
I kind of forgot what it was, but I think we're good.
I know. Me too.
Well, I guess actually I think the one thing I did want to follow up on is sometimes people, and I think you addressed this earlier, they get really obsessed, whether it's the person or sometimes even firms do this. They kind of have like a checklist of like skills you should be developing each year and experiences you should be having. Mm-hmm. I mean, how much do you think people need to worry about kind of checking this stuff off? I mean, I see a downside in not paying any attention to it, but also a downside in getting too obsessed with it.
Right. It's interesting because we also provide those, we call them benchmarks, and we provide them to our associates. And, and I always tell people when I show them the benchmarks and we talk about it, I say, this is not a checklist, and we don't want you to think of it as a checklist. I mean, I think those are great guides, and I'm really grateful that firms are starting to do that, because again, when I was practicing, it was sort of like, go dive in the deep end of that pool and start swimming, and you'll figure it out eventually.
Right.
And having that as a roadmap, I think it can be really great as a roadmap. Like if you're at the end of your 2nd or 3rd year and you're looking at the list and you're not seeing yourself in that list, or
right,
you're not
done
relating
nothing on it.
Yeah. Then it's probably time to have some conversations about rounding out your experience, to the extent that makes sense in your practice. And I'll say one thing here about sometimes what doesn't seem like it's going to get you very far, like, oh, I'm just doing doc review or I'm just doing diligence. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those are the best experiences. One of the best experiences I had as a junior associate was a diligence project for a deal that we did. And at first it felt very daunting, and it also was, and I was kind of like, again, with the story, like, oh, here I go doing that sort of nightmare first year, sit in a room with 20,000 boxes. And it ended up, I mean, I understood everything about the company that was being sold. I understood everything about how it worked, how it operated, who managed it, who owned it. It was like, oh, like all those things I did in law school that were sort of loosely, floating around in my head started to come together. And I really felt like it pushed me forward in my career. It just got me to understand things that I, in a holistic way that I hadn't before. And it started out as like, oh, this is that sort of nightmare scenario. So sometimes, this doesn't exactly answer your question, but sometimes those broad, general, big projects can really push you forward. And to answer your question, and they can hit a lot of those sort of check marks that you don't expect them to hit. Mm-hmm. But again, like I don't think that it's terribly useful to think of any sort of broad description of the experiences you should have as a checklist, because the nature of your practice is going to be unique to you, and the nature of the expertise you develop is going to be unique to you. And if you feel like because you haven't gotten a certain type of experience or a certain type of matter that somehow you're lacking, then you're going to drive yourself crazy. I mean, it's just, there's too much.
There are too many people to compare yourselves to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the point you made about kind of being that junior person doing the due diligence and really knowing everything, I think that's a really key role that people sometimes undervalue as junior associates, is like, you are the one who's closest to everything. You know, you're the one who's read the deposition transcripts or who's reviewed the documents. And the reality is the people above you don't really have the time or energy to put towards that. And so, you know, the more that you can be that resource of like, oh yeah, I know exactly where that piece of information is, or I have this information, I have this at the tip of my tongue, I can answer this factual question. That's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and I also think, so transitioning from like junior to mid-level, I think something that doesn't always translate and occur to people is, and to the extent you can do it earlier on, the better, but like you spend so much of your time in your early part of your career being like the person who knows everything, and kind of like anyone can call on you at any time and be like, where's that thing? What is this about? When's this on the calendar? And being able to answer the questions that you don't necessarily get good at saying, hey, by the way, this thing's coming up on the calendar, or, oh, by the way, we just figured this thing out. We need to think about it. Because you're so used to being the person who's sort of sought out and then you answer, as opposed to being the one who keeps the team abreast of everything and like, you know, and then putting in value. And there's a transition that happens where I see people kind of trip up between that junior to mid-level stage, where they forget that it's their job to start thinking broadly and to start being more of a manager for the partner and more of a proactive part of the team. I don't think there's a downside to trying to be proactive earlier on. It's just harder to do because you don't know as much and you don't know what to be proactive about.
Right.
But once you start to get the lay of the land, like you've got to, partners really expect and want you to start being the person who volunteers to think strategically and volunteers to, keep the team on pace. And, when they don't see that, that's when they start to kind of doubt you or feel like maybe you're not understanding what your role is shifting into. And it's one of those things that's like, it's sort of just expected. It's not always spoken. It's often unspoken. And that's where I see it can be a trip to people or a place to trip over for people because, you're waiting to be told what you should be good at next. And no one's going to tell you that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, the people that I saw be most successful as they moved up did take on increasing amounts of responsibility and did really become that person who's almost, was comfortable managing pieces of the project and managing the people below them and figuring out, okay, this is what we've got to get filed by this date. How are we going to do that? I mean, if you can take that off of the plate of someone above you and they trust you, that's huge. I mean, I had a partner once tell me, look, your job is to make my life easier and make me look better. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, like I get that. Right. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with what I'm actually supposed to be doing. But now that I know that, this all makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And it's, and I do think that's true. Like if you do view yourself as like, I'm here to make that person look good. I'm here to make the client think we are amazing. And by making that partner look good, that's what I'm doing. I think that's a great mission to keep in the back of your mind. I mean, not in like a weird, I'm not important way, but like part of the way that I be important is I make sure that this firm shines and that partner shines. And hopefully you're working for someone who you like and you want to make them shine. And that's something that when I'm coaching partners or when I'm coaching senior associates or speaking to lawyers on this podcast who may be senior associates or partners someday, it's like, be a great leader, be a great mentor to people, be the person that people want to bend over backwards to help. Like, if you make people feel important, if you talk them up and you give them credit and you tell them, that you care about their career and their lives, and you actually ask them questions about those things, they will do anything for you. I mean, they will make you look good. And so as we practice as lawyers, there's the whole side of getting the experience you need and learning and getting your training of, actually practicing law. But then there's so much of it that's just like, be play well on a team, be good to people,
Right.
Make people want to be around you. And that doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert or funny or anything. It's just, be who you are, authentically who you are, and care about people. And you should, that should help you quite a bit.
Yeah, I would imagine, as you move up to be like the junior partner, like your goal there is like, how do you get people to be loyal to you? Because basically this is an ecosystem where people are trying to work with lots of other people. Like you need people to want to work with you, right? Like you need your people.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are running short on time. Let me just run through a couple of different scenarios and get your thoughts on these.
Okay.
All right. So I am about to start as an associate at a large law firm when I graduate in a few months, but I just got an email telling me the practice group I was planning to work in was phased out. I still have an offer, but should I go?
This is a highly personal decision. I think one thing I would say is, variations of this can happen all the time, and maybe it's the practice group gets phased out, or the practice group you want is full, or and they're going to put you in a different one. I think the first thing is it's tough. These are decisions that get made, like decisions to hire people obviously get made 12 to 18 months before they're going to join, and so sometimes the business of the law firm and what you want, they don't jive, and it's unfortunate. Right. So hopefully your firm is very, very aware of that and feel and willing to work with you on that. I'd say you probably chose the firm you chose because of the people. And so I'm assuming, and you chose it because there are things about the firm that you really, really appreciate. In the rare circumstance where you chose the firm for this particular practice, and this fundamentally changes the way you thought your career was going to look, and you can find an opportunity elsewhere.
Right, and you have other choices.
Yeah, right. Like, so in this perfect world, then maybe you go elsewhere. But I think for most people, what's going to make the most sense is that they go ahead and they go to this firm where they had already decided to go, and they kind of see what happens. Like, let yourself be surprised to the extent that you can talk to the firm and say, are there going to be any opportunities to move in this direction? Are the partners who used to be in this practice group still here, but they're doing something a little bit different? There's all kinds of scenarios here, but just, I would say, go try to get as close to the experience that you thought you were going to have. And again, go back to that thing I kind of said earlier, which is, seek to have a broad base of experiences as a junior lawyer. Try to get as many as you can that feel like they're in the field that you want to be in, obviously. And, after 1 or 2 years of practice in, honestly, in any area, you're going to be better positioned to probably lateral to somewhere that's a little bit more focused on what it is that you want to do anyway. So you're probably better off going and just kind of rolling with it.
Given your lack of other options typically.
Yeah, I don't want to be, it just feels like you're in a bit of a lurch in that situation, and you just do what you do,
Yeah, I think your advice is just kind of roll with it is probably about your only option. All right, so I've been at a firm for a few years and things were going great. Loved the people I worked with, but a few months ago, I got put on a deal with a nightmare partner. It's really impacting me. What can I do?
So, I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit in our conversation already, that sometimes there are very, very big personalities in law firms, and working in any law firm, whether it's large or small, you're going to come across people who manage stress in different ways.
That's a polite way of putting it.
Right? And so, and sometimes, and like I said, partners are humans too. We're all just, doing our best being human. And some, are not the greatest humans. And there are certainly, so there's a couple different types of partner that I would talk about here. Like, one would be the partner that kind of everyone knows, like, oh, stay away from that one. That's a really difficult partner, like always, all the time. And hopefully, your firm, I know we do our best to not have those types of partners, but, a few get through.
Right.
And then there's the other kind of partner where it's like, for the most part, they're fine, but then like you go to trial and it's like, something.
They're crazy.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? Yeah. And that happens too. And again, that's just like people under stress, right?
Right.
So I think you know, in the nightmare scenario where you're dealing with like a short period of time in a, you know, a highly particular set of circumstances, and it's like you just got to get through this trial, I would say, and even with the other person who's just very, very hard to work with, my coaching is kind of like, you know, deal with your reaction to the person to the extent that you can. And so I'll use an example around this. So I once worked with an associate who was in a trial situation where they were, you know, it was very short stint, very, very high pressure in the moment. Everybody was at trial trying to get through and win, obviously. And the partner was extremely difficult. And the associate came to me one day and was like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I'm about to lose it. I can't, I don't want to get yelled at. I don't want, you know, I feel like I'm stupid. All the stuff that you feel when these things happen.
Right.
And I was like, so who does this person remind you of? Like, I got all like coachy. and the associate was like, oh, you know, I think it's kind of like my dad.
Right.
And like, we had this whole conversation about this person's dad. And it was like, this just makes me feel like I'm 8 years old again. Like, and what we got to in that conversation was like, oh, so when the partner does this thing, it's not even like I'm reacting to the partner. I'm like reacting to my 8-year-old self feeling crappy. And so it was kind of fun, you know, to go there. And obviously that feels very like therapy-like.
Right.
And so, I don't mean to suggest that you should go and like have therapy about it, but what you can, like, everyone who has a difficult personality, all they show us is like, they're just kind of a mirror for us. Like, ooh, like that's a personality I don't like, because it shows me something about either myself, like either who I think I am or who I don't want to be. Like, you know, when I come across someone who seems very, very, let's say, arrogant, I get really, really pissed off. I'm like, ew, they're so arrogant, and I'm so angry about somebody else's arrogance. Other people don't get mad about people's arrogance, but I do.
Right.
And it's probably because it shows me something. It's like, I learned early on that arrogance is like the worst thing that you could be, and, you know, you should be nice and not arrogant. And so it's like, I have this whole family story and this whole like, you know, motto that I live by, that you're not supposed to be arrogant. So when someone's arrogant in front of me, it really triggers me, and I don't like the person. I feel really like stopped, and I can't have a conversation with them. And it's all about me. It's got nothing to do with them. It's all about me. And so I don't know if this is a very good answer. I feel like it's kind of getting a little far afield.
No, I think it's good. I mean, I'm thinking back to like some crazy people doing crazy things at trial that I've worked with. And I mean, but also, so, you know, I think sometimes people are, you know, obviously people are triggered for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes people are just being completely crazy jerks. And the reality is like, sometimes you just have to stand up and be like, you know what, this is not acceptable and I'm not dealing with this. I mean, I literally had conversations at trial and other places where I was like, you can fire me if you want to right now, but I'm not doing this. And people actually respect that in a lot of ways.
You know, and it does happen that sometimes what a person needs from you is like you to step up. And so maybe what's happening in the stressful moment is like they're really willing for you to be like, hey, you know what? Okay, I got it. I got that you're upset. I'm going to fix it, but you got to stop.
Or sometimes people, I mean, they're playing out their own family, you know, childhood dramas where it's like, I just want someone to take care of me, even if that means telling me we're not going to do this. You know, it's like, I mean, I honestly think going to therapy was like the best thing ever in law school for dealing with all these personalities, because you do, you know, like everybody has their own things, and they're all like under pressure and under stress, which people are going to be under at a firm. All this crazy stuff comes out, and the more you can just realize like, oh, this person just wants me to tell them everything's going to be okay, and then they're going to calm down, even though they're getting paid 3 times what I'm making. You know, it's just like, all right, we're in this together. We're going to fix this problem. You know, don't you worry. We're going to take care of it. Like, you know?
Right. And I think that's really, and it's true. Like, I really do think like, if you can figure out, like, so I love this statement. It's something I'll say as a coach sometime is a complaint is a request is a complaint is an unmet request. And so it's like when someone's complaining, if you listen for the request or the need, then you might actually be able to handle it. You know, so a lot of times complaining is just like yammer, complain. But there's no like ask. There's no like, and here's what would fix it. It's just like, I just want to complain. And so if as a listener, you give up that they're ever going to ask you for something, because they're not, but you just listen for the need or the unmet request inside of the complaint, then you can actually respond to the request. Like, you can be like, oh, I hear what you're saying, and here's what I think you need, and
right.
How does that work? So that can certainly be a strategy. And I think in general, like working with someone who's just very, very difficult kind of all the time, again, it's going to take you like noticing like what it is that they do that really gets you, and actually working on that stuff, whether it's with a coach or a therapist, being like, so I notice like when they yell at me, or when they, hopefully they don't yell at you.
When they throw the stapler.
Exactly. Like, I'm not quick enough for that. So I got to work on my baseball skills. But no, I think that if you can get yourself like from having a reaction, that will take you like 50% of the way. Just like not reacting to other people doing their thing will get you so far. And then, there is a place for, like you said, like figuring out like what is it that this difficult person really needs, and how can you provide that so that you don't get into these situations. And then finally, what I would say is if you do feel like you're working for someone who is just not kind to you, or not respectful of you as a human being, or God forbid, like actually harassing you in some way or another, then you should ask for someone at your firm who's in HR to have a conversation with you. Ask for a confidential conversation with an HR manager, just to say like, these are the problems I'm having and I need help.
Right.
Because no one should have to deal with someone who's just completely disrespectful to them or unkind. Again, we all have situations, and we're not always our best, but like if someone's just generally, not being decent,
a decent human being,
yeah, then you should say something about that. And I would find either like the person who is me, or your firm might have an ombuds person who's like, sometimes a very senior partner who's not very, involved in the daily practice, who can talk to you, or like an HR person who should be willing to hear your grievances confidentially, and then help you decide what's next.
Well, on that point, last scenario. So I'm a mid-level associate. I've been dealing with all the things we're talking about, and I just can't keep doing this anymore. I'm not really sure what I want to do next, but I know I want a better work-life balance. I want to feel like my work matters. I want to work with people I like, but I still have quite a bit of student loan debt. I can't just quit and go sit on the beach. So how can I start to figure out my next steps?
Well, so I think you should always keep your network up to date. Like, it's never too soon to start, making sure that you are well networked with your law school classmates and with the people who you graduate law school from, and also the people you went to college with, and all of that. I think having a great network always comes in handy, because when it comes time to start thinking about what's next for you, you can kind of put the feelers out there, right? Start talking to people like, hey, what do you do? What does your spouse do? What do your friends do? What do you like about what you do? What do you think I'd be good at? So like maybe start asking people. That's how I figured out I was going to be a coach. I went and I started talking to people I used to work with at the law firm, and they were like, you're always talking to people about their lives. Like, you should be a coach. And I was like, what the hell is that? And so I didn't even know what it was, but like other people told me I should do it. And then I looked into it and I was like, oh yeah, I think they're right. So, ask the people in your lives, keep your network up, keep it solid. I think, it's always smart to have a resume, and keep it up to date. I know it's an easy thing to kind of let languish, but every 6 months or so, refresh it with the stuff that you've been working on and the expertise you've gained. Talk to, when headhunters call you, be polite and tell them that
they might be able to help you someday.
Yeah, exactly. Don't hang up on them. Just take their calls and say, I'm not interested right now, but I may be someday, and I'd like only in-house opportunities, or just be really clear with them and let them know that they should call you when certain things come up. And I also think, we're really trying to get better at this at our firm. And sincerely, we're trying to find ways to make this work better. But, your firm may actually have ways to help you figure out what's next for you.
True.
We want, we're training you guys. We're you're our colleagues. And we hope that someday you'll be our clients, if not our partners. And so, your firm, or at the very least, some of the people you work with, or some of the people who work at the firm who maybe you don't work with, may have ways for you to find opportunities to get placed with clients. And so if you can find somebody to talk to about that, or if your firm has a job board, we're launching a job board next month, which is pretty exciting.
Oh, cool.
To try to find and funnel people towards great opportunities at our clients. That may be something you could do. And I think those are my broad tips. Just generally, like, knowing yourself. Obviously, if you want to make a total career transition, like I did, for instance, maybe talking to, like you said, talking to a therapist, talking to a coach, talking to just sort of a professional headhunter kind of person might also be useful.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, Whittney, can you share your best advice for young lawyers who are starting out in their careers?
I think my best advice for young lawyers is, like I think I said earlier, just kind of allow the journey to unfold a little bit. Don't get too mired down in what you think it's supposed to look like. I think I heard someone speaking about this recently. He called it the illusion of permanence, that we all sort of have this illusion of permanence where we think, like, what's happening right now will happen forever, or what we choose right now will impact us forever. And outside of really pretty much having a child,
right?
That's really, not even marriage anymore, right? Like it's not much is permanent. And what you're doing right now may or may not look like what you're doing 2 to 5 years from now.
And you have no idea. If somebody asked me 5 years ago, what's your 5-year plan? I could not in 8,000 years have come up with what I'm doing now.
Exactly. And there's something about that. There's something about, like, the sort of, I don't know, like the magic of that, right? To just, like, allow room for life to just kind of happen and the magic to happen. If you have too tight a grip on stuff, you will miss out on opportunities. And so I really think, like, you should have a sense, right? I'm a coach, so you should have a sense of where you want to go. You should have goals, and you should certainly be striving to create results, but don't get too fixated on how it's supposed to look. Just, like, really allow the stuff to unfold and push you around a little bit and get experiences, see what you like, go for more of that, see what you don't like, move away from that, and then, I think you'll have a much more enjoyable career, and you'll probably end up pretty successful without a whole lot of stress and angst about, like, trying to drive it and really, really kind of, like, keep a tight grip on it.
I think that's a great point. I've often thought of it kind of like a pool game. Like, you take your best shot, you see where the balls are, you take a step back, you take your next shot. You can't predict in advance, obviously, how the game's going to turn out. All you can really do is play the balls on the table and, like, do your best and then see what happens.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
I don't know if it's my career goal. Just, take your best shot. All right, well, Whittney, Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been fun.
Oh, our pleasure. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app, because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. If you're looking for career help, check out our career subsite, Career Dicta. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.